I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. You're in session 28, advocating for CF across the lifespan. I'm one of the session chairs. I'm Katie Whitley, and I have Heidi Cross over here, my co-chair. And we have 4 great speakers. So we have 2 speakers with us in person and 2 that couldn't make it and will be live. They have a recorded session, and then they'll live stream in for Q&A at the end. So neither Heidi or I have any disclosures. Learning objectives for today will be to review legal protections for those with chronic illness within the public education system as well as within the workplace, discuss career development and employment barriers experienced by those with CF and how vocational rehab may be a useful resource when navigating these processes, and to review Social Security disability, including the qualifications under CF diagnosis, the clinical documentation that needs to be in our provider notes, and to help support ongoing benefits and the challenges maintaining those benefits after starting highly effective modulator therapy. These are the instructions for submitting questions. The organizers wanted the questions submitted via the app, so if you haven't mastered that already, you are about out of time. But there's the instructions. You can take a picture if you want. And then we'll plan for just like a couple minutes of Q&A after each speaker, but try to kind of move on to stay on time, and then we'll have a bigger chunk of time at the end for Q&A for everybody. And then our first speaker today is Sarah Strong. She's going to be speaking about advocating for CF and school protections. Sarah's a Senior 3 specialist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, where she is also the program manager for educational research in the Center for School Services and Education Research. As a certified teacher, special education is her background. She also has a master's in behavioral analysis. She taught in the public school setting for several years and has worked at Cincinnati Children's for 10 years with children who have been diagnosed with congenital heart disease, sickle cell disease, and cystic fibrosis. And I will get out of here. I think you can just hit start.
Good morning. Thanks, Katie, for that great introduction. Let's see if we can start this. Perfect. First of all, I want to say thank you so much, you guys, for allowing us to be here this morning. Yes, as Katie said, I'm going to be talking about school protections, and so I look forward to your guys' questions. I have been greatly appreciative of grant funding from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation as well as the Boomer Esiason Foundation. Those are my disclosures. Today what we'd like to talk about with you guys is looking from a K-12 setting, but then also post-secondary. So talk about that post-secondary planning. What are some of our options, the laws and regulations that are associated with that for post-secondary accommodations as well as workplace etiquette, and how do we engage in this dialogue with our families and our patients? So I know this sounds kind of strange, but with post-secondary planning, it's really important to start in about 7th, 8th grade. So around 12 to 13 years old, we really want to start having the conversation of what do you see yourself doing outside of high school? What are some of your passions? What are some of the things that you're interested in? This conversation really needs to be scaffolded over time, right? If you ask a lot of 7th and 8th graders right now what they want to be, you're probably going to get a YouTube star, right? Like that's what we're going to hear. We're going to hear, I want to be a YouTube star. Okay, what do you want to be a YouTube star about, right? And then you can start honing in that conversation and determining what some of their passions are. What do they want to do? Do they have a school plan in place? Does that child know what that school plan is? What do they feel comfortable with disclosing to their peers? That self-advocacy piece is really important to start growing at that young age because that's going to help them to build success as they get older. The other common, conversation to have with them is what options do you have after school? So not only what your passions are, but what route do you, see yourself going? Do you even know, maybe no one in their family has ever been to college before, or maybe they're interested in a vocational career and they don't even know that it exists. So it's really starting to talk about that. On top of that, you really also need to talk about their adaptive life skills. What does it take to be independent? Do they need additional help with some of that? Funding options. Have they talked to their parents about if there is any money for them to go to college, or even to do a post-secondary program? What is FAFSA? What are loans, right? So how does that work? How do we pay them off? And what would be your responsibilities for that? What are admission requirements for something? Timelines and applications. These are conversations that they may not have had with their parents or with their peers or even with their siblings. Are they more interested in doing like work-based learning or employment, job skills? So, as you know, from 7th to 8th grade all the way through high school, building on that conversation, like I said, scaffolding that so that when they do get to those pivotal times where they have to make some of those decisions, they feel as though that they are ready to do so. Because there's so many different options for post-secondary that sometimes they don't even know what's out there. Oftentimes I tell kids, my background is education. I thought that I would be a teacher for 30 years. I was really just so honed into it. And then all of a sudden this amazing opportunity came for me to work at Cincinnati Children's. I didn't know there were teachers in hospitals, right? And so my career took a turn. It's not bad that they take turns, but it was a turn, right? And so you don't know what's out there until you start to research it and you start to look at it. So what are some options for our kids? There's so many different ways that kids can go about it. And it's really important that we realize that like each child has a different route. And like I said, while you may start on one route, you can always go to another. So it's very common for kids maybe to start at a community college, which tends to be a little bit less expensive. They can get 2 years worth of their credits done, and then they can transition into a program in which maybe at that point, they actually have an idea of what they want to do. Or for some, maybe they want to start out in a vocational program to be able to earn money while then they want to earn another degree. There's lots of different ways for us to kind of help our kids to get there. So I do want to go into a little bit more of some of these. The first one I'd like to talk about is vocational programs. So why do we need to talk about this early? Because within the general education setting, typically vocational programs happen during their junior and their senior year. So what you want to do is during that 8th grade, freshman, sophomore year, be talking to them about what does your school even offer? What's out there? Is there a program that you're interested in? So then they can actually have the skills to know freshman, sophomore year, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. What's the application process for that? That tends to happen during their sophomore year, so then they would attend during their junior and their senior year. What are the requirements for those programs? For some of those programs, they are very strict on attendance. What is your health status like? Are you able to put the time in that's required? Because, for example, we had a patient who was doing HVAC. Okay, so there is a lot of dust in there. There's different things like that. We had to work with the respiratory therapist to make sure he had the right mask on to be able to go into those different places. But on top of that, he had to follow the OSHA requirements. He was inpatient. How do we do that? How do we work through this? Those are conversations that you want to have ahead of time so that the student feels prepared, but then is also being able to be their own self-advocate in those situations, because when he does transition and go into the workforce, he's going to be responsible for advocating for himself. With that, with that advocacy, what type of communication is good for him? He's a kid who likes to text and likes to email. Okay, how do we do that professionally, right? So it's even building up that you might be a junior, you might be a senior, but how do you professionally communicate with these individuals that you are learning these skills from? And on top of that, once again, what do they feel comfortable with disclosing? What is that, and that's going to change over time. So it's important when you have those patients who are looking at these different programs to have those conversations at the high school level to then say, then what do you want to do after you graduate, right? Because we know for quality of life, when you enjoy what you do, it increases that. So we want to make sure that our patients feel that they can actually make money for themselves, or that they have a plan to be able to move forward. But once they accept that diploma, and I put this in there, defer their diploma, I do want to talk a little bit about that. What laws provide them protection? So deferment of diploma, this is a very, very small percentage of individuals, okay? So the patient must be on an individualized education program. So they are receiving specialized services through special education. What happens is that that child needs to meet the federal and the state requirements, and this is a school-based decision. So pretty much what they determine is that this child's disability, okay, they have not met all of their goals and objectives, and they require more time for them to be able to meet some of those skills and also to learn adaptive skills. This means that they defer their diploma. So they're still covered under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and they receive services through their school system per a certain amount of time. In the state of Ohio, they age out on their 22nd birthday. In the state of Michigan, it's on their 26th. So this is where it's important to know your laws and your regulations and to really look at that to determine if if one of your patients is considering this, what age would they then roll out of services, and then what is their next steps, right? So it's important to think about that and to be able to help navigate through that process. What if they choose college or university? We were actually having a really interesting talk before this, but if your guys' patients are interested in applying for a college or university and they need to take the ACT or SAT, they can apply for accommodations for the ACT and SAT. But here's the thing with that. They need to be able to show that they've been using those accommodations over a specific amount of time. You can't just implement them right when they're about to take them because the ACT and the ACT board will decline them. You need to be able to show proof of evidence that they've been using those accommodations across time. This will allow them to have maybe extended time. For example, maybe they need to go to the bathroom in the middle of it and they're in there for 15 minutes, then you don't want them to rush during that assessment because that could compromise the quality of the material that they're being able to show. So it could be a small group, it could be a small group environment. So it's really important to have those accommodations be put in place for them ahead of time so they can use those on those standardized tests. And that also goes for like state testing and different things like that. But when a child accepts that diploma, the IDEA and parts of the Section 504 plan, they stop protecting that child. And they fall under more of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and parts of the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So our kids are still protected. And the reason why these were put in place is because unfortunately discrimination was occurring. And so what we want to make sure is that everybody is able to have access to that. And so they require some accommodations. The accommodations look a little bit different. So what happens is that most places now are called the Office of Disability Services. However, some of those names are changing. Some of them call them like adaptive services or different things like that, which is exciting to see kind of a shift in some of the terminology there. But what happens is that the student, once again, this is where self-advocacy becomes super important, is because the college or university is going to expect that the student comes in and talks to them. Some parents like to go with them. Some parents say, hey, do this on your own. There's different various levels of support that are needed for the different patients. But you meet with the Office of Disability Services. Oftentimes they require proof. So you could use an after-visit summary. We provide medical documentation such as a letter. So you may get a request for that to be able to then show them with like maybe recommended accommodations that they would need. And the different thing about this is you would then go to every single professor and determine from them what accommodations are needed for that class. Because if you have a lab where you're doing things with bacteria and spores, one of the things on there could be wear a mask. But like if you go into English class, and then maybe this is not like pre-COVID or like post-COVID, but then maybe like you don't need a mask there if like you feel comfortable enough to wear it, but that's an example of potentially needing a specific one and your professor understanding why you need to have that. And the most important thing I can state here too is sometimes our kids are like, oh, I mean to do that. And then they get in a situation where they're like, oh, I missed class because I was having a bad morning. I was like having increased sputum and I was coughing and I couldn't go. And the professor's like, well, you can't make it up now. And they're like, no, I'm going to go to the Office of Disability Services. We'll get this figured out. It doesn't work like that at college. There's no retroactive services. So that's why it's so important that kids go as soon as they go there so that we can make sure that these supports are in place. It's better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them, right? So that's why we really want them to be put in place. So what are some of the accommodations that you could potentially see? Preferred scheduling. So prioritize or preferred scheduling. So kids can say like, okay, like I know mornings are hard for me. Can I go in the afternoon? Or maybe if classes are really close together and they're far distances apart and there's worry about how are they going to get there, how can we change that? Extra time on assignments. A big one is like, what if they're absent? How do we make sure that they're getting what they need? And the other thing is looking at, what did you use in high school? What made you successful in those classes to then be able to transfer that over to the university? What was helpful that that school did to make sure that you were being able to demonstrate what you know? And I have a really interesting story. I just got an email from a mom who said, well, he missed one of his classes, and the professor, and I think this is kind of like a problem. This will show you, like, attendance is a concern for universities, right? One of the professors was making them take pictures to show how sick they were and sending them to the professor so that then they could determine if it was okay for the child to be out or not. So I mean, like I said, there's different things happening in different, institutions, but it's one of those things where it's nice to be able to say, oh, well, I was, we've talked about this ahead of time. This is my paperwork from the Office of Disability Services, and let me explain this to you. This is why I was sick, is because I have cystic fibrosis. But listen to what I just did. That's self-advocacy, right? That takes time to learn, and it really takes time to be able to address that. Like, you're confronting it, but you can do so in a way in which there isn't conflict. But it's really easy to get it escalated in that way if you feel attacked, which is why we want to really build that within our patients so that they feel strong enough to be able to have those conversations. So once again, the most important thing is that communication and what they feel, comfortable, and encouraging them to say, okay, if you're more comfortable with email, how do you write those emails? How do you address people? It's not, hey, what's up, prof? Like, let's try and make it be a little bit more professional there. Or if you have that relationship with someone, then that's okay, right? Like, it's building that rapport and having kind of those conversations with it. And if they're inpatient during that time, it's also, I have to give our students, who are in college, a lot of credit, because a lot of them will use passes to go out to their classes, or they'll do the online part. But it's just like when they were in high school, it's the fact of, if you're inpatient, that means you're sick, right? And if you don't have your health, then you're not going to be able to access your education. So there may be days in the very beginning in which you just need to focus on your health, and then we can transition, and then we can think about you getting into classes, right? For some of our patients, it can be really hard. We had a young lady who was in dental school and to become a hygienist, and she had to meet her hours. And it became, I see my social worker and we actually had a conversation with her program director. And we were like, how can we help you? How can you help us? How can we make this work? She's an incredibly intelligent girl. She's at the end of her program. But that's when it comes down to, they had to meet those federal regulations. It absolutely had to happen. So how do we make it work for her? And so, but still allowing her to get better. And I have to say, she did graduate. It was great. It was a happy story. And she met those qualifications. But it just took a lot of time to be able to figure that out, because we do want them to make sure, that they are focusing on that. And when you have this dialogue with families, I think the biggest thing is when you start so young, it can kind of seem like, why are you talking to me about college in 7th grade? Well, it's because we want you to be prepared for when you are in 12th grade and you're there. So as I said before, I would say it's definitely a scaffold kind of conversation in which you allow the patient and the families to set that tone and figure out when they're ready to do it. In Cincinnati, we have a high level of students who attend private schools. So in 7th, 8th grade, we're having the conversation of high school equivalency tests. What high school are you going to? What does this look like? So it's a similar process. It kind of mirrors it, but then we're talking about, okay, I'm not going to ask you about college right now because we're focusing on what high school you're going to go to. So it's more appropriate for me to wait until you're more of that like freshman, sophomore year where you have your feet wet a little bit to then begin that conversation. But we can use that experience to then say, how do I use it to apply to this situation? And I think, it's allowing yourself to be patient and to build upon that so that you don't overwhelm the family with that. And, everyone has a different path to where they ended up, and everyone has different experiences. So like I said before, some may have no one in their family who's gone to college. Some may be pretty adamant that they don't want to go to college. And just because they don't want to go to college now doesn't mean that they're never going to go. But sometimes it's just not the right path for some kids, right? So some are like, no, I really want to do this vocational program. I really want to earn money, and I want to live on my own and be independent because that's what I want to do. Okay, well, how do we help you to be successful there? You know, and looking at like in 10 years, that might not be what you want to do, but how do we make sure, you know, that you feel like you have some options in that so that you can be successful, you know, regardless of where your health goes. And I think this is too is when you can kind of tag team with your social worker, or if you are the social worker, to talk about financial literacy, and you can talk about, you know, what does it look like to be independently living, and what skills do you need to be able to be successful? Because it all kind of wraps in, and the sooner you can have those conversations, the better it will be for that patient. But just recognizing, you know, that also this is a difficult transition for some parents. When you talk about college, it can be emotional, and it can be hard sometimes to let go of some of that control. So also coaching with the parents about how to talk with their child about that, and also like saying like what's in your control, what's not your control. Some kids want their parents to have more, and that's okay, you know, but it's figuring out what their dynamic is so that you can be with them. And I would say too, I mean, a big one for us that we've talked about is FAFSA. We've literally had kids come in with their FAFSA paperwork and sit down and go through what is a subsidized, what is an unsubsidized loan? How much are you going to have to pay off on this? What does interest mean, right? Like, and so being able to have those conversations of when you get out of school, if you decide to do this program, how much are you going to pay? But once again, some families are already doing that and some aren't. So just recognizing that each family and each patient has a different path, and just trying to help their, you know, help to be supportive in that environment. But thank you, everyone. And this is my contact information if anyone has questions.
Do you have questions on that?
I think we have a couple minutes for questions for Sarah before we move on. If anyone has any immediate questions, and then we'll have a bigger Q&A at the end of the session. Any questions? Check the app. Yeah, we don't have any questions. All right, no questions on
I
that.
have a quick question.
Yep.
So how does it sort of look in your clinic? Like, how often are you meeting with families in your role? And are you going like with the social worker, or is it kind of your own discipline?
No, that's a good question. Yes, so it is kind of like on a referral-based system, but I've thankfully been able to be implemented in our clinic for about 5 years now, a little over, and so I know the patients pretty well, and so we're able to determine like if there's questions or concerns or kind of where they're at, and like I tend to be in clinic with our patients, and if a question or concern comes up, then I can jump in and I can just, you know, either go in by myself or go with the social worker or whoever it may be to have those discussions with them during that time. Sometimes, you know, we all know clinic gets really busy, or parents are like, hey, can we have this conversation offline? And so it's easier to call them at a time that's more appropriate for them. I've even had calls with kids, or even like Zoom calls and things like that, to be able to review things, just because sometimes there's not enough time, because we want to be cognizant of getting like people in who need to see them right away. Yeah. Yeah.
In regards to that, is there a specific resource that you would recommend to kind of help families with things like the FAFSA and what are these roles and those kind of things? Because like putting it out there, even when I was in high school, I didn't know what that stuff was. So I think it's right to the point that the does get busy, and sometimes the kids are not doing well, or you know, the visits kind of summarize and focus on their health. Do you guys use any specific tools or teaching tools for that kind of thing?
Yeah, so the government's website is actually a lot better now than what it has been in the past. And so if you actually go to the FAFSA website, they have some pretty good step-by-step directions of what to do. And then they also have numbers listed, like they have hotlines and helplines that you can call. So my recommendation would be, if you have a family who can independently go through that, to try that, but then encourage them to write down questions as they go through. And then if they call the hotline and it's not helpful, or they're not able to reach someone, then they can reach out to you guys and have specific points of questions, of just not like, right, like they could say like, I'm having problems with the FAFSA. Okay, what part of the FAFSA are you having problems with? Like, so then they're able to have like a more directive conversation. You're welcome. Thanks, you guys.
Great job.
let's move on to our next speaker. There we go. Go. Just 1 second. All right, our next speaker is Pablo Saldana. He is, since 2005, Pablo has been the CF social worker and manager of the patient and family-centered care at Nemours Children's Health in Jacksonville, Florida. He is a licensed clinical social worker and holds a PhD from the University of Florida in rehabilitation science. His research interests include employment trends and career development in CF and the utilization of vocational rehab services. He is captain of the Nemours Great Strides team and is a founding board member of the Dylan's Dream Scholarship Foundation for college students with CF. Welcome, Pablo.
Good morning, everyone. Just a minute while I try to get my talk up here. Is it this one?
Yeah, it just hit start, like on the top bar.
On this device, or?
Yeah, you just go
Oh,
there
I'm sorry.
and start.
Thank you.
It's a little, go there. Yeah, that's a little.
Okay. Let's hope this works. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pablo Saldana. I'm with Nemours Children's Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida, and my background is in social work and rehabilitation counseling. I want to thank Katie and Heidi for inviting me to give this presentation today. I'm very grateful to be here. I also want to say what a privilege it is to share the stage with Sarah Strong and Beth Suffian and James Passamano, because these guys are all stars in my book. I also want to say just what an honor it is to be here to discuss career development and vocational rehabilitation services. When I started in 2005, this would have been a very, very different conversation about career planning, and I'm just so happy to see how far along we've come in those 17 years. Just want to say that it's rather timely that we're having this talk in November, because November is designated Career Development Month, so I want you all to go back and wish your patients happy career development. I have no disclosures to tell you about. Oh, thank you. Okay, need a little coaching. So I want to say that sometimes our patients feel like our furry friend here, that they're not sure what they're going to do after high school, or sometimes even after college. I have to tell you that career uncertainty is one of the leading causes of emotional distress in young adults, and it leads to many mental health challenges. So I believe that by starting to tend to their mental health as we do in our CF clinics, that we're actually just setting a strong foundation for them to become thriving career professionals someday. In general, you know, we place so much emphasis on knowing what we want to do from a young age, and that's not always an entirely realistic notion for every patient. So I just want to emphasize how important it is to go home and kind of normalize these feelings for your patients. Oops. So I like to say that living with CF and working with CF is complicated for many various reasons, and as you know, more and more individuals with CF are now reaching adulthood with a regularity that was even unknown just a decade ago. And as they do that, they are having to make career decisions and entering the workforce. So at one point in time, patients with CF were not even considered viable candidates for vocational rehabilitation services because, or owing to the fact that their disease had often progressed so much or advanced just by the time they were becoming working age, which is around 16 to 18 is when we start working age, that they were not being referred for VR. But I think that this tide is beginning to turn on that. Still, people with CF are at unemployed. Their unemployment rate is more than the general population, and their tendency to become unemployed over time is also greater. So just for some context, I'd like to read you quickly this definition about career development. Career development is the total constellation of psychological, sociological, educational, physical, economic, and chance factors that combine to influence the nature and significance of work in the total lifespan of any given individual. This is from the National Career Development Association. I really like this definition of career development because it's holistic, and that is the same way that we approach CF in our clinics. Career development's a lifelong process that starts from a very young age. For example, children, grow up kind of fantasizing or daydreaming about what they want to do as adults. I like to say, though, that as far as any plans that teenagers might tell you about, take those as tentative. So the process of career development starts at a young age and sometimes doesn't end until folks reach retirement age, because we know now that career can take many twists and turns as you get older, kind of like what Sarah told you about it a moment ago. So I'd like to review with you some barriers to optimal career development. We know that mortality is improving, but yet lots of psychosocial and health barriers do persist. So there's this tyranny of low parental expectations. I find this especially around the time that young adults are thinking about leaving home or maybe moving out of the family home. There's lots of fear about treatment adherence and this kind of thing, and I think we have to reassure parents that their young adults will hopefully make good decisions. Employer bias, this especially is around providing accommodations such as a altered work schedule or work from home, missed days from work. This could lead to folks being overlooked for promotions or other opportunities, so hopefully can minimize missed days from work as much as possible. Of course, we know that patients with CF have frequent medical appointments, recurrent hospitalizations and pulmonary exacerbations, and the daily treatment burden, and so on. So any combination of these factors can really derail someone's career aspirations. But the good news is there's facilitators as well for career development. So resilience is essentially the process of adapting well in the face of adversity or trauma or other significant stressors, and certainly CF falls under that category. Self-care skills. I liken these to the first chores that our kids with CF have, and chores are really dress rehearsal for adult life, so I always encourage parents to do chores, assign chores. What else here? Attendance and participation in school is so important. Participating in IEP meetings, I really encourage this because it does promote that self-advocacy and give the student a chance to speak for themselves. Engaging in extracurricular and community activities provides that chance for self-development. And computer literacy anymore is a given. We like to think that our students are very computer literate, but there's a big difference between being literate on that phone and being technologically literate and computer literate. So encourage them to put the phone down and mess around with the laptop once in a while. And finally, empowerment and self-determination. If we foster all of these traits, we can really help to provide some protective factors for career development. So let me give you some background in employment in CF. The good news is at one time CF was considered a childhood disease, as we know. But that's really changing, and so now young people with CF are getting to make career decisions and eventually enter the workforce. There were nearly 18,000 adults in 2020 in the patient registry, and of those, 52% are working. That's a great statistic. I think that's going to go up as time progresses with the advent of highly effective modulator therapies. But that 52% mark, that's been holding steady. I've been tracking this for a long time, and for about the last 10 years, employment rate has been hovering around that 50% mark, but I really think in the coming years, we're going to see that start to go up quite a bit. So why is work so important to people with CF? Work has great salience, meaning it's prominent or important in people's lives. Obviously, work furnishes an income, which is very important, but beyond that, it provides that daily structure that we need, provides opportunities for personal development, the social connectedness that we know is so important, the status and identity, having a purpose. I'd like to say that everyone needs a reason to get out of bed every day. And the economic independence, in a nutshell, I personally think that work is just very therapeutic. So the world of work has shifted over time, as we know. Years ago, it was more of an industrial or manufacturing or farming-based economy. It's kind of like this old-timey factory that you see here on the left. But in the new economy that we live in, it typically requires some type of has an emphasis on technology, and typically is going to require some type of post-secondary education or training beyond high school. So when I have those conversations with our patients about what their post-secondary educational plans are, I try to get away from really using college a lot and just talking about how that could look different. Could be vocational training or certificate program, associate's degrees, or four-year college also, but college may not be for everyone, so I just encourage you to be kind of sensitive in your language in that area. So how can we maximize career development? There's quite a bit that you can do in those quarterly visits. It doesn't seem like a lot of time when we maybe have 15 minutes with a patient, but there's little things that you can practice, role plays that you can do with patients to kind of plant the seeds of career development. So there's lots of instruction or coaching that can happen. And I've kind of broken them down into certain categories for you. So interpersonal skills, helping or practicing role plays with your patients, like how do I communicate with my boss, for example? Helping with teaching problem-solving skills, like what do I do if this or that happens? What happens if I need a day off from work or I need some other accommodation? Teaching and coaching and self-advocacy skills. This is like, what do I need and how do I go about getting it? And obviously promoting education or higher education, which leads to better access to more job opportunities. And vocational rehabilitation conversations can happen in your clinic sessions, and that is going to be the rest of our talk. So vocational rehabilitation services, I'm not going to say that, so I'm just going to keep using VR for short. VR services are offered in every state and all have a very similar mission, like what you see here depicted for Florida and Georgia. And essentially, it's to assist individuals with disabilities to gain employment. One caveat, as we talk about VR services today, I'm just going to kind of talk at a very high level because it can look very different in different states. So I'm just going to give you some generalizations. Florida's VR statement is to provide services to eligible individuals with physical and or mental impairments that will enable an individual to achieve an employment goal and or enhance their independence. If you look at Georgia's goal, it also uses that word independence. So employment is part of it, but I think the bigger picture is just leading to adulthood and providing independence for our patients. So individuals with CF could benefit from being referred to VR services. That's my take-home message. Out of nearly 18,000 adults in the patient registry in 2020, only 179 were enrolled in VR services. So let me tell you that again, 179 patients out of 18,000 have been referred. Not to say that VR is for everyone, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but when I calculated the percentage on that, I think it's like 0.009 out of the adult population. And when you think about it, you can refer young people as young as age 16 to VR services, so that's even a larger number. So just something to consider. So VR, when I have VR conversations with parents and patients, I'd like to tell them that it's like a very specialized employment agency that can help individuals with any kind of condition or illness or disability to go to work and put them on a career path. In other words, VR has a process of helping people to choose, get, and keep employment. And I use that phrase quite a bit because it's just kind of a handy way to conceptualize it, choosing, getting, and keeping employment. And they do this along a three-phase process. In the choosing phase of VR services, this would be for someone who maybe has that career uncertainty and not sure what they want to do. So they have a process of helping a patient consider career options and selecting one. It could be doing some career exploration. It could be offering patients to take a self-interest inventory like the self-directed search, or there's many self-interest inventories that folks can do. Once you progress through the choosing phase and you've identified a goal, you proceed to the getting phase. And in the getting phase, VR helps people to understand the mechanics of how to obtain their identified career goal. So it could be something as easy as picking a school. Maybe you've identified something like becoming a veterinary technician. Well, that program is not offered everywhere. I know this because I have a few patients that have wanted to do that, and there's one school in Northeast Florida that offers that. So kind of deciding what the career goal might be or employment goal might be, identifying a school where one can gain that training if formal education is required, then going to the school and so on, going through all those steps in the getting phase. Finally, in the keeping phase, VR helps with providing maybe any needed equipment that a person might need or job coaching. And generally with VR, once you've been on a job for 90 days, they close you out. And again, it's not a linear pattern with VR. Sometimes you take some side roads. So generally they close folks out after 90 days, but people can be in VR as long as it takes to obtain your career goal. So VR has a core of 28 services. I haven't listed them here for you because that was too many, but just to give you an idea of some of the services that they can provide to our patients, there's career exploration, counseling and guidance, college, university education, occupational, vocational training, which would be more like short-term training, maybe anywhere from 6 weeks to 18 months. Job readiness training, help with job placement, short-term on-the-job supports or job coaching and shadowing, community college training, and supported employment. I just want to pause. I don't know if I put it in a later slide, but regarding like college or community college, VR, years and years ago, I can remember a time when they really helped quite a bit financially with college expenses, but they've really pulled back, way back from that. So now more of what you can typically expect in the terms of helping with college might be assistance with books or equipment, a laptop, and those kinds of things, or some miscellaneous fees. But the days are over where they used to come in and bring up the rear after your FAFSA and your scholarships. So just to give you an overview of what the process is to refer a patient to VR, it's fairly straightforward. It starts with a referral. A patient can self-refer themselves. It's very easy to call your local office and say, hi, I'm Johnny, I have CF, I'd like to refer myself for services. Or in Florida, it's just a one-page referral that you can get permission to submit for a patient, and they sign it and you fax it off. I have to tell you, VR is one of the quickest agencies that follows up with your patients. Thereafter, they'll be invited in to complete an application. Some VR offices in Florida will do like an orientation session, and which is more like an information session, and they'll invite people in This is pre-COVID, so I'm not sure if they're still doing these information sessions now, but they would invite folks in, they'd show a video and answer questions, and then the person could decide, yeah, I really do want to continue on with this process. After that session, the patient and the VR counselor would complete the application together. It's mainly gathering a lot of information, demographic information, educational history, and most importantly, the medical history. It's very important to tell your patients to tell that VR counselor every single condition they have. They may not think that their GI issues are very prominent, but don't just lead with CF, I guess. During the application process, the VR counselor will have your patient sign a release of information. Again, the most important part here is that they have to establish eligibility for the program. And so make sure that your patients are armed with the name of every health system that they've been to, every place, every different clinic or specialty that they've gotten their care from, because it really helps to build the case to determine eligibility. After the eligibility phase, an IPE is developed, and that's an individual plan for employment. So this is where you really get to the meat of it. What services is VR going to actually provide? If a student is going to need some educational assistance, it has to be in the plan. If a service is not listed in the plan and it's signed off on, it won't happen later. So you want to make sure that they have education or whatever services they might need included. After then the plan is developed in collaboration between the VR counselor and the patient. Sometimes they'll hand a patient like a form to collect information. It's a very long questionnaire, and that questionnaire drives the development of the IPE. And oftentimes it's just done very collaboratively. And after the plan is developed, that's when services start to be rendered, and all the services that I showed you on the last slide, leading up to job placement. And that's in most cases, that's the ultimate goal for VR referral, is to wind up in a job placement after your education or training or on-the-job training and so on. I just want to mention some of the special features that VR offers. School-to-work transition services for high school students with conditions or disabilities. In Florida, I'm going to say they're supposed to refer a student with an IEP to VR services automatically. In practice, it very, very rarely happens that a student with an IEP is referred. So I always ask about VR referrals. Often it doesn't happen, so I have a conversation, would you like to be referred, and see if they would like that. The other thing, important thing to know about VR is if you have someone who's a recipient of SSI or SSDI, they're considered to be categorically eligible for service. The red light's going off, so I'm going to start talking really fast. So if someone has SSI or SSDI, it means they can bypass the eligibility determination stage. So that saves them a little time, and they can proceed with developing the IPE and going on to getting services. Okay, who to refer? So I just want to kind of go over, you're probably wondering, well, what kind of patients can I refer, Pablo? Here's some considerations. Your older patients who have more advanced disease or poor lung function, these are maybe folks that have already been working and been in the world of work. VR is very good at helping people retrain. So maybe now you've become much sicker in your later adulthood and you can no longer do the job that you used to do. VR is very good at helping folks retrain for a new career. Patients with other comorbidities, for example, CF-related diabetes or GI issues. High school students 16 and older are eligible for school-to-work transition services. And I'm sorry I didn't mention it earlier. This is like the precursor to VR services, so it's like VR Lite, but it gets them in the system and it gets them on the road to full VR services. And if you have, some of you may have patients with co-occurring conditions, maybe developmental delay or intellectual disabilities. So these would also be just ideal candidates for VR services. And please don't overlook someone for employment services because they have a developmental delay or an intellectual disability. I know no one in this room would do that, but other providers may think, well, so-and-so's not capable of work. They are. Just quickly, VR has an order of selection policy in most states. This is due to funding, as you might guess. VR generally cannot serve every individual with a disability who applies for services, so what they do is categorize people. And what you want to do, and the reason I emphasize that patients should go in there and just tell their VR counselor everything, we want our patients to be assigned to category 1, or most significant. And this is a Florida example, by the way. 41 states use some type of order of selection policy, and they can be anywhere from having 3 tiers, like Florida, up to 5 tiers. And so generally, tier 1 or category 1 is the considered most significant, and ideally that's where we want our patients to land. That's so they can receive services right away. If someone is assigned to category 2, it means they have a significant condition, they're eligible for services, but they're gonna go on a wait list. And in Florida, if you're assigned to category 3, still they're acknowledging that you do have a condition or disability, but it's not as significant as category 1, and you're gonna go on a wait list and you're gonna wait even longer. I'm sorry, my light went off. Are you gonna pull me off? Okay.
You're fine.
This is my last slide. So I just want to tell you that service delivery happens by community partners. So not all of the core services that VR offers are actually offered by VR counselors. They deal with a lot of vendors and community agencies and so on to deliver their services. And most often you'll see this if someone needs, like, they contract a lot with psychologists or neuropsychologists to do intelligence testing or to do intelligence testing, IQ testing, and neuropsych testing, I'm sorry. And they also contract with outside physicians to get an outside opinion or to confirm a person has a condition. So here's my contact information. If you think of something or if I can be helpful, you can reach me at my email. I also have a poster that goes into a lot more detail about VR services, so please stop by poster 332, and I thank you.
We have a couple minutes for, if we have immediate questions for Pablo. Otherwise, we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Any questions right now? Yeah.
No, that is a tough one. That's the age-old question of when to disclose. I think that Beth and James are going to go into this in our next session. Yes. My personal kind of guidance to patients has always been to let's get through the interview process. Let's not self-select or self-identify and maybe eliminate yourself from contention for a job. Just go in there based on your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and then maybe follow up later. I mean, there probably will be a time when you'd have to self-disclose, but I don't know if I do it at the interview phase. So if I don't know if that answers your question.
I have a quick question just to kind of build on that one. If they are using VR services to like find employment, is that like communicated to the employer in some way? Are they going to be like, oh, this is a VR referral, like this is a patient with a disability, or a candidate with a disability?
The answer, well, it depends and not necessarily. So VR does have generally networks of employers that they work with, but sometimes, again, depending on individual's unique goal, they may not have maybe an employer they've worked with in the past, but they offer quite a bit of job coaching and job shadowing. So it just depends if it would be known to the employer or not. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Wonderful. Our next two presentations are pre-recorded, and after that we will have our last two presenters will be able to join us virtually for a Q&A. Our next speakers are James Passamano and Beth Suffian. Beth Suthian Passamano, rather. James and Beth are partners at the Houston law firm Suffian and Passamano LLP, which operates the CF Legal Information Hotline and the CF Social Security Project. James is a former senior trial attorney for the U.S. Employment Opportunity Commission. He has represented people with cystic fibrosis and advocated for their rights for 30 years. Beth is the director of the CF Legal Information Hotline, as well as the director of the CF Social Security Project. She is an expert on the legal rights of those living with CF and has been a fierce advocate for the CF community for several years. James was unable to be with us in person today, so his presentation is pre-recorded, and Beth had planned on being in person. However, she had an unexpected change of plans, and her presentation is pre-recorded directly after James's. Her presentation, she will be joining us virtually at the end of both talks for a Q&A, as well as James will be joining us as well. Since Beth is an expert on both legal protections for workers and Social Security, please feel free to ask her any questions that you have on either her or James's presentations, or James, since he's now joining us. All right. And James is first.
Good morning. Thank you, Katie and Heidi, for that lovely introduction. Before we begin, please note that I have no relationships to disclose regarding this presentation. Today, we are going to talk about legal protections for workers with cystic fibrosis. Before we go further, please know that this presentation is for informational purposes only, and we are not making any assurance, guarantee, or representation about any rights or remedies that you may have, and that if you need to consult an attorney about a question of legal rights and remedies, you should consult with a qualified attorney about your individual and unique situation. Well, let us begin by asking an important question. How important are employment rights to people living with cystic fibrosis? If we look at the CF Legal Information Hotline reporting data from 2018 to 2021, we can see that it is a matter of increasing importance to people with CF. In 2018, only about 1% of all calls, about 160 out of 9,000, related to employment. The next year, 2019, there's a 5-fold increase. The next year, 2020, which by the way was the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was another 5-fold increase. Nearly 40% of all calls, 5,000 calls out of 13,000, related to employment matters. That's 4 out of every 10 calls. Now things have moderated a bit in 2021, but still, nearly 20% of all calls, 1 out of 5 callers, relate to employment. If you'd like to see further information about the CF Legal Information Hotline call data, you can see our poster at this year's NACFC, which is poster number 314. It's down in the poster exhibit hall. If you're interested in past years, you can see our published abstracts that are cited here. Now today we're going to focus on FMLA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and we'll touch briefly on GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. One question that we often receive at the CF Legal Information Hotline is, I asked my employer for FMLA leave, but my employer says it doesn't have to provide FMLA. Why is that so? Well, private employers that have 50 or more employees are covered, but small private employers who have less than 50 employees are not covered. They're not obligated to provide FMLA leave if they have fewer than 50 employees. Now, public employers That's state, local, and federal employers. They are a covered employer regardless of their size, and similarly, public and private schools, elementary and secondary schools, they are also covered regardless of size. But be aware, even though public employers and public and private schools are covered generally, there is still a size requirement that is applied to the individual workplaces, and we will see that in just a moment. A second question that is often presented on the CF Legal Information Hotline is, hey, everybody at my workplace gets FMLA leave, but when I ask for it, my employer says no. How come? Well, the FMLA requires that both the employer be a covered entity and also the employee requesting leave must be an eligible employee. Well, who's eligible? Well, first of all, the employee has to work for a covered employer. Secondly, the employee must have worked for at least 12 months. And in the 12 months immediately preceding the leave, that employee has to have worked 1,250 hours. And here's that second size requirement that I mentioned. So this applies even to covered employers. At the location where the employee works, there has to be at least 50 employees at that location or within a 75-mile radius of that location. So what that means is that a covered employer who has a remote or sparsely staffed workplace that is detached and distant from the home office or the regular place of work, that small place of employment with few employees may not be covered, even though the employer is generally regarded as a covered entity. Now, what are the reasons for taking FMLA? The reason has to be qualified. It's not for any reason. It has to be for one of these three reasons. Well, first of all, is the birth or placement of a child. Secondly, to care for the spouse, child, or parent of the employee if that spouse, child, or parent has a serious health condition. Now, CF will almost always count as a serious health condition. But focus on this aspect. The relationship to the employee matters. Spouse, child, or parent. If grandparent, grandma, or grandpa asked for FMLA leave to care for the serious health condition, the CF, of their grandchild, that is not a qualifying reason, because the relationship to the person with the serious health condition is not spouse, child, or parent. Grandparent is not parent. Also, an employee that has their own serious health condition. So this would be an employee with CF. Of course, they can take FMLA leave to care for their own serious health condition. What benefits does a person taking FMLA receive? This is often questioned as, how much do I get paid during my FMLA leave? Well, the answer to the pay question is, well, possibly zero, because FMLA leave is for up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. Now, keep in mind that an employee may take, as part of their FMLA leave, the 12 weeks of leave, may take accrued sick leave or accrued vacation time as part of their 12-week FMLA. It does not add to the 12 weeks, it is part of the 12 weeks. And more important than that, an employer may require the employee to take accrued sick leave or accrued vacation leave or other type of accrued paid leave as part of their 12 weeks of FMLA leave. Now, while a person is on leave, the person is entitled to continue to receive their health benefit plan benefits on the same basis as any other current employee. And that includes the employer's contribution towards premium. When the leave is over, the employee is entitled to return to their same or similar position that they had when the leave began, if that position is available. Now, I do want to point out something. What if someone does not return to their job at the end of the FMLA period? Well, the employer is entitled to claim from the employee any of the costs that it expended to maintain their employee health benefits during the leave period. So if an employee does not return at the end of their leave period, FMLA leave period, the employer is entitled to claim as a debt from the employee to the employer whatever cost or expense the employer expended to maintain their health benefits during the leave period. What are an employee's remedies if an employer fails to observe the obligations of the FMLA? Well, the employer is prohibited from taking any adverse employment action, discharging, discriminating, retaliating, or any other adverse action against an employee who is exercising or attempting to exercise a right under the FMLA leave. Now, FMLA is enforced both publicly and privately. An employee can complain directly to the Wage and Hour Division of the United States Department of Labor. The Department of Labor is tasked with enforcing the FMLA. However, the employee can bring a private enforcement action, bringing a civil action directly against an employer who violates the requirements of the FMLA. Now, keep in mind that we have been discussing the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act. Some states have their own FMLA laws, and I've noted them here on the slide. These state laws may be commensurate with the remedies and rights under the federal law, or it may provide greater protections than the federal law. But it depends on the specific terms and conditions of the state law. Let's move our focus now from the FMLA to the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. But before we get to the substance of the ADA, let's pause for a minute and understand the meaning of disability. The term disability is defined in each statute, and each statute defines that term differently. Disability is defined one way under the ADA and a different way in the Social Security laws, and still other ways in insurance law for long-term or short-term disability policies. And it may even be defined differently or is defined differently in laws for protecting education rights and disability. The point here is to understand that there is not a single definition of disability, and you must make sure that you are applying the correct definition to the circumstance. If you apply the wrong definition, very likely you will have a wrong analysis and reach an improper result. So the American with Disabilities Act broadly prohibits disability-based discrimination. However, like the FMLA, we have to look both at the nature of the employer and the status of the employee to determine if a claim can be brought. So employers with 15 or more employees are covered by the ADA. And notice that the number of employees is different for ADA than for to be a qualified, to be a covered entity, is different from FMLA to be a covered entity. ADA, 15 or more employees. The person asserting a claim must have standing to assert the claim. So the ADA prohibits discrimination against qualified individuals with a disability in employment. So qualified means they have to have the skill, training, and experience requisite to perform the essential job functions. And that's the ability to perform the job either with or without a reasonable accommodation. Disability means that it's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. For people with CF, it would be an activity such as breathing. That's a major life activity. A person can also be disabled if they simply have a record of disability, have once having a limiting impairment, but now they have recovered, or simply being regarded as being disabled. They don't have any impairment and never had an impairment, but the employer treats them as if they did. Now, the ADA broadly prohibits discrimination in employment in a variety of ways. One of the many ways is when an employer fails to provide a reasonable accommodation to a person with a disability. That is a form of discrimination defined in the ADA. A reasonable accommodation is any change in the work environment or the way things that are customarily done. such as policies, practices, and procedures, where that change would enable the person with the disability to perform the job or otherwise enjoy equal employment opportunities. So the basic duty is that employers have a duty to provide a reasonable accommodation to an employee with a disability. The limit to that obligation is if that requested accommodation would impose an undue burden. An undue burden is anything that is unreasonably expensive or unreasonably difficult to perform. So the employer is not obligated to provide requested accommodations that are unduly burdensome. There's a point here that you need to observe. If a requested accommodation is shown to be an undue burden, that relieves the employer of providing that particular unduly burdensome accommodation. It does not relieve the employer of their general obligation to provide reasonable accommodations to employees with disabilities. So even if a single particular accommodation was shown to be unduly burdensome, the employer would still have a duty to provide some reasonable accommodation that is not unduly burdensome. There are a few things to keep in mind about accommodations. The duty to provide an accommodation is only to employees with disabilities. There is no duty to provide an accommodation to employees without a disability. Now, how might this work with a person with CF? Well, sometimes parents who don't have a disability request an accommodation for their child with CF. The child has a disability, but the child is not the employee. The employee is requesting an accommodation, but the employee does not have a disability. So there is no duty on the employer to provide an accommodation to a non-disabled employee, even if that non-disabled employee is making the request because of a disabled child. There are other provisions of the ADA that might be helpful in this example that we're using. So an employer is prohibited from discriminating against an employee because of their association with a disabled person. So an employer cannot discriminate against a non-disabled employee simply because that non-disabled employee is associated with a disabled person, such as a spouse with CF or a child with CF. Also, it is a form of discrimination to retaliate against an employee who, in good faith, seeks a remedy under the ADA or attempts to exercise a right under the ADA. So an employer cannot retaliate against a non-disabled employee for requesting a accommodation because of a disabled child. And of course, a disabled employee who seeks a remedy is protected against retaliation as well. Now let's look at the disclosure of disability status, particularly in employment. The ADA and the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act governs the employer's handling of employees' disability status or health information. Now please understand that this is not a HIPAA issue. I know and appreciate the enthusiasm that healthcare professionals have with protecting patient information under HIPAA. But often they seek to apply the standards of HIPAA in contexts where HIPAA does not apply. So HIPAA privacy rules typically are not applicable in employment simply because employers are typically not HIPAA covered entities, and also employees are typically not patients of their employers invoking the protections of HIPAA. So what are the employer's obligations? Well, first of all, there can be no inquiries before an offer of employment, no disability-based inquiries. And that's any inquiry that is likely to elicit information about disability status. Now, after an offer of employment is extended to a person, the employer may conduct a medical exam or disability-based inquiries, provided everyone who is similarly situated, everyone who's in that same class of job candidates, is subjected to the same inquiry. So you can't single people out. And also, if the employer seeks to revoke an offer after there's been some inquiry about disability status, there must be facts that demonstrate that the candidate is unable to perform the essential duties of the job, either with or without an accommodation, and that no accommodation would enable the employee to perform the job. So yes, if a person is offered a job and after it's offered, the employee is discovered to be incapable of performing the job, well, of course, then the offer can be revoked. Once a person begins working, there are limited situations in which an employer can seek and collect health information from an employee. Now, usually there can be some degree of health inquiry and even medical exams, but only if those exams or inquiries are job-related, consistent with the necessity of business, that there has to be some requirement or job-related necessity of obtaining that information. But keep in mind that the employer is obligated to keep all disability and health-related information or medical information separately from the employment file, the general employment file. The purpose of keeping the information separate is so that an employer does not consider health information or disability status when making decisions about increase in wages and salary or promotion. If an employee seeks to enforce or seek a remedy under the ADA, there is a procedural prerequisite under the ADA. So the person cannot go directly to court. There is a procedural prerequisite of a civil action of filing a charge of discrimination with the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And the charge of discrimination must be brought promptly within 180 days of the last act of discrimination. Now, in some jurisdictions, that 180 days is extended to 300 days. Where does that occur? Well, if a state or a locality has a state or local law that protects disability rights in employment, prohibits disability-based discrimination, the federal law gives that local agency the first opportunity to resolve the complaint. And so the federal timeline is extended to 300 days. But the important thing here is that the time to file with the EEOC is short, and a person must file with the EEOC before they can go to court. Keep in mind also that many states have their own civil rights statutes or human rights statutes that prohibit disability-based discrimination. And those remedies under state law may be greater than those available under the ADA. And one final note before we go. The Genetic Information and Non-Discrimination Act, or GINA, prohibits an employer from using genetic information. So this would be, and this has a particular relevance to CF as a genetic condition. So an employer may not use genetic information in making employment decisions, but also an employer is prohibited from seeking out that information, requesting it, requiring that it be provided, or even purchasing genetic information about applicants for jobs or employees of the employer. The exception, however, and it applies in a narrow set of circumstances, if that information is necessary to provide a reasonable accommodation, or for an employee to obtain sick leave or FMA leave, the employer may require, to the extent it is necessary, genetic information. Thank you very much. I look forward to receiving your questions, and thank you again, Katie, Heidi, and all of you for having me today.
All right, let's move on to the next pre-recorded presentation for Beth Seflian.
Thank you, Katie and Heidi, for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to speak about Social Security and cystic fibrosis beneficiary. I have no relationships to disclose. This presentation is informational only. Nothing in this presentation is intended to be legal advice, and no insurance or guarantee of eligibility for benefits is expressed or implied. A person who may be eligible for Social Security benefits should not rely on this information, but should consult with a qualified attorney about their individual and unique situation. A little bit about myself. I am a partner in the law firm of Suffian and Passamano. I am director of the CF Legal Information Hotline for the past 25 years and director of the CF Social Security Project for the past 20 years. I am a practicing attorney for 32 years, and I am 57 years old and have cystic fibrosis. The CF Legal Information Hotline was established in 1998. It provides free and confidential information on the laws that protect people with CF in the United States. It is operated by the law firm of Suffian and Passamano. It has 8 employees. It is sponsored by the CF Foundation, although hotline employees are not employees of the CF Foundation. You can see our poster 314 in the exhibit hall, which is titled the CF Legal Information Hotline, a reliable resource for the CF community during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. We had, in the first year of the pandemic, 13,000 calls. So we had a lot of people calling and asking for information, and we have received a lot of positive feedback from our efforts during that first and second year of the pandemic. In the second year, we had 10,000 calls, and for 2022, we are looking at having a little more than 10,000 calls. Social Security disability provides 2 different types of benefits to people who are disabled and not able to work more than 20 hours a week. So when an application for benefits is filed, the person applying cannot be working more than 20 hours a week. If the person is going to school, to college or graduate school, the person cannot be working and going to school more than 20 hours. And Social Security looks at the hours the person is in class, whether the class is remote or in person. So if you're doing 10 hours of school classes, then you only could work 10 hours. In 2022, a person applying and a person who is on benefits cannot be making more than $1,350 a month in gross earnings from work activity. If the person is self-employed, the monthly gross earnings limit is $970. So you must be below the gross earning amount and be working or going to school a number 20 hours a week. Supplemental security income is different because for SSI, a person must be within certain income and asset limits. For a person under the age of 18, the household in which the claimant lives must be within the income and asset requirements. So if there's one individual living in the household, usually that would maybe be a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old, that individual cannot have more than $2,000 in assets. And if it's a family of 2, the limit is $3,000. And if it's a family of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, the asset limit is still $3,000. At any given time, the person who is applying or is receiving SSI cannot go over these asset limits. The resource limit does exclude the value of 1 car and 1 house that is used as the claimant's residence. Other eligibility. An individual who is deemed disabled by Social Security before attaining the age of 22 may become eligible for a benefit based on the work record of a deceased, disabled, or retired parent. So for more people with CF, as people grow older, more people who've been on SSI before reaching the age of 22 are now being switched to a benefit based on their parents' work record. But across the United States, when a person does become eligible for a benefit based on a deceased, disabled, or retired parent, that person is undergoing a medical eligibility review. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Social Security medical eligibility criteria is the same for SSI and SSDI, and that criteria can be found at www.ssa.gov. So that is the Social Security listing, and it lists a lot of different conditions and what the person with that condition has to show in order to be medically eligible. And when we do the live Q&A, you're welcome to ask about any questions, and you're welcome to ask more about medical eligibility. Even if a person does not meet a listed criteria, the person still may be eligible for benefits if they show they are as severe as the listed criteria. Often for people with CF, they may not meet the actual pulmonary CF criteria, and there is only pulmonary criteria related to CF in the Social Security listing. But sometimes the person may be able to show they are as severe as the listed criteria by explaining different medical issues they have and showing that when you combine all of those conditions, the person is as severe as the listing.
They're here if we need them.
Medical records are extremely important to a person who is applying for Social Security or a person who is undergoing a Social Security continuing disability review. They are essential to the success of the application for benefits, and I cannot stress that more than I am doing. So often when people are denied on an application for benefits, or they are losing benefits on a continuing disability review, it is because their medical records do not clearly discuss their daily limitations and their medical treatment burden, and do not give enough information that would show Social Security the person is incapable of self-support, which is working more than 20 hours a week, and not being able to work more than the monetary monthly work amount. So when people are going to their CF center visits, it is so important for the clinic visit notes to record all symptoms, including digestive issues, including diabetes, including mental health conditions, and not just listing that someone has diabetes, but how that condition affects the person on a daily basis and how long it takes to take care of that condition. Evidence of limitations in daily activities is crucial for the person who is applying or undergoing a continuing disability review. And this is where people with CF who apply on their own often fall short, which leads to a denial of the application or termination of benefits. So I know that the session chairs have listed as a main focus for this talk is to talk about evidence that is needed in the clinic notes. So here are some examples These are not the only things that should be in the clinic note, but for an example, the amount of time performing breathing treatments, not just a list of the medicine, but a list of each medicine and how long it takes to do through the nebulizer. The amount of time it takes to manage diabetes. So planning meals, checking your sugar, having to lay down if your sugar is low or high, all of that should be recorded in a clinic note. Frequency of bathroom visits and the amount of time for each visit are very important for the person who has a lot of digestive issues which are preventing the person from working more than 20 hours a week. Need for additional rest or sleep during the day and how long that rest is taking. 1 2-hour nap, 2 1-hour naps, whatever it is, it should be recorded in the clinic visit notes. So let's talk a little bit about continuing disability reviews. Social Security does continuing disability reviews every 3 to 5 years, and they are doing hundreds of thousands of reviews in 2022. So many of your patients, or if you're watching and you have CF, you may have received a continuing disability review. And Social Security is going to learn of health improvement during a continuing disability review. That's how they find out if a person's health has improved in such a fashion that the person is no longer meeting or as severe as the listed medical criteria. So when a person receives notice of a CDR, they should know this is very important. The person is at risk of losing their benefits because if they do not provide enough evidence showing that they still are eligible for benefits, their benefits will be terminated. This is not paperwork that should be filled out while a person is in the grocery line, which we hear from a lot of people who contact us. People can contact us on the CF Legal Information Hotline to see if we may be able to assist with a continuing disability review, and there is no cost to call the hotline, and there is no cost if we do find that we are able to help with the review, and that is thanks to the generous funding we have from the CF Foundation. So 18-year-old reviews are separate from continuing disability reviews. When a child who is receiving SSI benefits reaches the age of 18, Social Security will review benefit eligibility. CF centers should alert families prior to the child turning 18 that they will be getting this paperwork, because so many families tell us they either throw the paperwork away because they don't think it's necessary. Many people think that their children will have SSI for life, which is not true. And then many of the people who contact us after being terminated after the 18-year-old review tell us that they did not understand the importance and they very quickly filled the paperwork out. So please warn your families. People who are listening, who are parents who have CF, let people know, if you're involved with different CF groups, how important both the 18-year-old review is and the continuing disability review. For children who are reviewed at age 18, they don't understand that the medical listing for adults with CF is a little bit different than for children, and the criteria is different because for 18-year-old review, they're looking to see why you cannot engage in full-time work. And Social Security considers full-time work 1 minute more than 20 hours a week. Recently, in the past year, there's also been a dramatic increase in overpayment notices. This is when Social Security reviews the non-medical eligibility, which includes income and asset eligibility. If Social Security sees that a person was over income or over assets, they can ask for the repayment of the benefits that were paid in the past. They can go back as far as they want. They can go back 5 years and say, you weren't eligible 5 years ago, you owe us 5 years of benefits. People can appeal an overpayment notice if they think it is incorrect, or they can ask for a waiver of the overpayment if they misunderstood and, more importantly, don't have the money to pay Social Security back. But for the most part, Social Security will want a payment plan so that the person is paying back their overpayment, and Social Security can reduce the Social Security payment, either SSI or SSDI, to reduce the benefit amount, and that portion of the benefit goes towards paying back the over. So I've quickly gone through a lot of complex ideas, and so please make sure that you let your patients know, or that you call if you have questions. Calling before a person loses benefits is really important, and email is the quickest way to get us. You email us, we'll email back to set up a time to talk. Or if people don't have access to email, they can call 1-800-622-0385. I look forward to talking more during the live Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, let's start the live Q&A.
Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear us okay?
You can hear us.
Great. So let's start with some questions. Please welcome James. You want to go by James or Jim?
Either one is fine.
Okay. And Beth Suffian and James Passamano. So let's start with some of our virtual questions that have come up. Let me pull up the list here. So the first question, I'm not sure how to answer. The question is, what is the work of the psychologist at FC with you? Is it in a team?
Say that question again?
I'm not sure that one was for them.
Yeah, I think that's
Or is that maybe for
Sorry, what is the word?
all right.
FC. Yeah, I think this question is for Sarah.
What is FC?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what they mean by FC.
I'm not sure either.
All right.
If you want to rewrite the question and put it
Yeah.
back in the queue, we'll answer it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, the next question is, what role does the patient CF clinic provider play in requesting FMLA, disability authorization, etc.? How important is the support of the clinic for the patient to take this action?
Okay, so FMLA requires that there be a serious health condition or serious medical condition, either of the employee with CF that's requesting leave, or a serious health condition of the family member, parent, spouse, or child. So the employer doesn't know anything about your health, or your child's health, your parent's health, so they need to be informed. And because the law requires that there be a serious health condition, there has to be evidence of a serious health condition. The word of the employee, the person requesting the leave, usually is insufficient. They need to have some certification from a healthcare provider indicating that a serious health condition exists, that it exists with that qualified family relationship, parent, spouse, or child, and here's the important part, that serious health condition requires the care of the employee. And that will usually need to, there's a form promulgated by the United States Department of Labor for this purpose. Sometimes employers use their own version of, they have a form that's not from the DOL, but from, you know, their own form. But it will require the certification of a healthcare provider, usually an MD or DO. But it will need to be appropriate to the condition.
Great. Thank you. All right, next question is, if I enroll in the Social Security Ticket to Work program, can Social Security review my eligibility for Social Security benefits?
Excellent question. So the Ticket to Work program is a program where Social Security provides money to private contractors, and you get a ticket, a paper ticket that you take to that contractor, and that contractor is supposed to help you find a job. So often that contractor notifies Social Security that you have become a client of the contractor and that they are looking to place you in a full-time job. So often that can trigger a medical review. Right now, the jobs that the Ticket to Work contractors are getting people, and there's lots of articles on this, are usually fast food and retail. So if someone does want to use Ticket to Work, we just recommend that the person make sure their medical records have a lot of information about their daily limitations. In addition, if you have CF and you do not think you can work full-time, then Ticket to Work is probably not the program for you. There is another program, it's not really a program, but it's called Trial Work Period. So a trial work period gives someone who is on Social Security disability 9 months, up to 9 months, to work over the allowable work criteria. And the idea is you may want to try to work, but if you're afraid that you'll lose your benefits if you just work for 2 months, Social Security a long time ago decided that they would give people up to 9 months to try to work. Now, in the past administration, the Trump administration does have guidance that they issued that says the 9 months is permissive, not mandatory, which is true. So some people are getting 9 months to try to work over the allowable, and some people after 3 months are getting a letter from Social Security saying, we see you're working a lot and we're gonna stop your benefit. So all of these, the different work programs, and if someone is trying to decide if they are gonna try to work, those are great people to refer to the CF Legal Information Hotline. Another important thing about the CF Legal Information Hotline is you don't need a referral from anyone to call the hotline. You can call directly to us. So people certainly can call CF Foundation Compass. They offer great information on a variety of topics. But if someone calls to CF Foundation Compass with a Social Security question, CF Foundation Compass refers the person to us. So if you want to cut out that step of having someone contact a different group first, it's fine for them to contact us first.
You know, I just want to add a little something on that. Just keep in mind that Social Security disability is essentially equated with the inability to work. So if you're getting a Ticket to Work referral, that's an indication that you can work. And that would be a basis for Social Security to reevaluate or do a continuing disability review as to whether you continue to be eligible for benefits. Because there is an affirmation that you can work by participating in Ticket to Work. The other thing is that on the 9 months of trial work period, is that if you are engaged in substantial work, and this goes to that permissive aspect of it, if there's evidence that you can work full-time, that might be an indication that you are no longer eligible, and that might trigger a review.
I just had a follow-up question for that. So if you're on the Ticket to Work program and then you just transition to working full-time, but something happens down the road and that person's conditions worsen, how hard is it to get back on Social Security disability?
So it's going to depend on how bad their health is, so there's kind of different levels of what we see from people that we talk to and people we help. So on the Social Security website, it does say that if, for Social Security disability, if you become unable to work within 36 months of going back to full-time work, which is more than 20 hours a week, that Social Security will do an expedited review to see if you are eligible to go back on benefits. So right now, that definition of expedited review is 12 months in most areas of the country. So I think some people who call us say, no, it's supposed to be expedited. I can get back on in a few weeks. And that is not what we're seeing. So I think it's important to know that the 36-month expedited review promise, or what it says on the website, is actually not what we're seeing. So if someone goes back to work and 12 months later they have a significant health decline, and again, either they meet one of the listed criteria, so they have a low FEV1, or they've had hospital stays for IVs, or they're as severe as the criteria. They have very bad mental health issues, plus digestive problems, plus uncontrolled diabetes. That would be a case that's as severe as. That person can then ask to be put back on benefits, but the paperwork is the same paperwork used for an initial application. So it's just like you're applying for benefits again. And certainly we are very fortunate and grateful that the CF Foundation provides us with funds to help people who either need to apply for Social Security or need help with the review. So there's no cost to the person. And so people can certainly call us. We look at their medical records and ask them questions and see if we can help them. So the reason that we have the CF Social Security Project is that most people with CF will not have a large amount of back benefits that an attorney who does Social Security cases takes their fee from. And so I think it's fine for people to find another lawyer, but most lawyers won't take a case where the person doesn't have a lot of back benefits, so that the case has pended for a long time. So hopefully that's helpful.
I have a question.
Yeah, just one word on the expedited review. Some people attach their own meaning or their own definition of expedited to that word. Just keep this in mind. When Social Security uses that term, they're talking about a different internal Social Security process. They're not necessarily referring to a faster time. It's just when you're applying, the burden is on you. On an expedited review, so expedited, the burden is on Social Security. So it doesn't really describe the time or the speed at which Social Security will act. It's a way for Social Security to distinguish one process from the other.
Quick question about like expedited versus non-expedited. For like an initial application, how long is that review process usually?
In most states right now, that's taking 6 to 8 months. In Florida, it's taking 12 months. In California, it's taking 9 months, and that is because there are millions of applications right now from people with long COVID. There is not a listing criteria for long COVID, and so those cases are taking a long time to develop, and that has made the whole process take much longer. So, it's taking a long time. We do have, good luck with really developing initial applications, and I'd say about 50% of the time right now, it's taking about 3 to 4 months in many areas of the country. But in big states with lots of long COVID applications, it is taking much longer, even if the person is very sick with CF.
And just to make this point again, when Social Security says expedited review, they are not talking about the speed at which they will turn that application around. It is used to designate a different process. It has a few more steps. That doesn't necessarily translate to a faster reply or a faster determination to the applicant. So I just don't want anyone to think that expedited versus non-expedited means that you get a response quicker from Social Security. Expedited doesn't refer to that. It refers to just a different process within Social Security. And it may be exactly the same amount of evidence from what the claimant sees or activity the claimant sees, and the same amount of time, even though it has the name expedited process. So don't think that if it's an expedited process, it's a faster process or an easier process. No, it's just as long, it's just as difficult, it's just processed differently inside Social Security where the claimant never sees it. So.
And this is why, if you work at a clinic, if a patient comes to us and we're trying to decide if we can help them, they need to get us 12 months of medical records. And we only need clinic visit notes, PFTs, and hospital discharge summaries. If the person has a lot of mental health issues and that is preventing them from working, we would also need records related to mental health. But Social Security is only going to be looking at 12 months back of records. And the reason why we want the records and the reason why we take, as much time as we need to put together a really strong case is because if people are just applying and saying, I have CF, send me a check, and there isn't a lot of development of the cases get denied. And then it's another year before you have a decision on a first appeal. So, this is why we have the CF Legal Information Hotline. We have 8 employees. We are working a lot, but we always have time for people. We have time for emergency calls if the person has a review and it's due tomorrow. We can help the person if they're eligible. And so we just really plead with everyone to make sure that people know that this resource is available, that we are funded by CF Foundation, which is amazing. There are no other disease groups in the United States that have projects like ours, where attorneys are working on cases and all we do is focus on CF. So please tell your people about us.
Sure, and the medical, just a point on why the medical records are so important. Many people call and they think that diagnosis is the same as disability. I've been diagnosed with CF, send me a check or sign me up for benefits. And it's not that way. Disability is different from diagnosis. Disability requires a showing of the severity of symptoms, daily limitations, and limitations in daily function. And all of that requires evidence, all of that requires medical evidence, because of course Social Security doesn't take our word or the patient's word, they take the doctor's word. And that's where why the complete and accurate medical records are so important, because disability is different from diagnosis. Disability requires a showing of the severity of symptoms.
And one more thing, so a letter from the doctor is not considered to be credible evidence. Social Security wants to see 12 months of the clinic visit notes or hospital discharge summaries. A letter that a doctor writes saying, I think my patient is disabled, is not credible evidence. And you know, the larger issue is that there were 2 doctors in West Virginia and Kentucky who were writing thousands of letters to Social Security about 5 years ago.
Not for CF.
Not for CF, for other things. But those situations led to Social Security saying, credible evidence is medical records. We do not find a letter from a doctor to be credible, which is why the medical records are so important. We have so many people who tell us, I have severe trouble with my digestive system. I go to the bathroom 7 to 8 times a day, and I'm in the bathroom for 20 to 30 minutes. And there's nothing in their medical records about it. And the person says, they never asked me if I have digestive trouble. So it's just so, we always tell our clients or tell people who call us, like, you have to tell your doctor the things that are limiting your ability during the day. But just be aware that, you know, there may be things your patient isn't telling you. And then in that situation, we suggest that the patient have another clinic visit. Go in with notes. The notes are not evidence to be attached to the file, but just to help the person to remember what they want to say in the clinic visit so that they can have an accurate clinic visit. And you know, I just had a clinic visit a few weeks ago, and I followed my advice of having, you know, I have like a little notebook, and I put in, you know, a list of things I want to tell the doctor, but I had some things that I focused on, and then yesterday morning when I woke up, I had some pain in my wrists, and I thought, I never told them about that. So it's easy, even if you're super organized, it's easy for patients when they are having a visit with you to either minimize symptoms or forget to tell you something. And so I think just, you know, really if you're on a CF care team, really trying to make sure, do you have anything else? Do you have any limitations? What about, you know, digestive issues? And then if you have CF or you're a parent who has a child with CF and you're watching, you know, to keep a little log. I love, this is my little log book, has a cute little cover. And I just, to keep a log of what's going on, because so many of our callers say, well, Beth, I'm just used to all this. I don't even realize how long it takes to do breathing treatments. I don't realize how long I'm taking a nap. And so trying to, as if you're the person with CF or the parent with a child, just keeping a little log or doing it on your phone or your computer so that when you go to your clinic visit, you give an accurate picture of your health. If you're not on benefits, you should still do that because you may end up needing benefits. Certainly if you're on benefits, everyone is at risk of getting a review. They are reviewing people. Anyone who hasn't been reviewed in 3 years, they're sending out hundreds of thousands of reviews at the beginning of each quarter. So they sent out about 200,000 on October 1st. And now the first week of January, they're gonna send out another 200,000 reviews. The other way people are getting reviewed is they call with a question for Social Security, like, I don't know, what's my retirement age? Social Security pulls up their file on their computer and they say, oh, you haven't been reviewed in at least 3 years. And all they have to do on their computer is push a button and then a review is generated. So always so important. The clinic notes are like gold. They're as if you just have a big stack of gold with your clinic notes.
Great.
And look, we often tell the people that contact the hotline is your CF care team, they're wonderful. They're brilliant. They are great practitioners. wonderful physicians and social workers and nurses. They can do so much for you, but they can't read your mind. You gotta tell them.
All right, let's, I think this one you already answered, basically. It was who pays legal services for the CF patient, so that's coming from CFF, correct?
Right.
And then,
Yes.
and
We
then,
don't charge the individuals anything because the foundation is first of all wise and has a long vision and sees the benefit of funding this service for families with CF. So it is a great pleasure to give the services to the families with CF, and it's a great privilege for the foundation to see the value in this and to fund it not only this year but for many years since.
yeah, great. Next question, what is the poster number name? I think that's for the current one.
314. Poster number 314.
314. And we do want to thank Beth Ann Wagner, who is a respiratory therapist at Baylor in Houston, and also Dr. Sandy Suffian, who have made it possible for the poster to be up and viewed by people. So
Yes, we couldn't be there, but without their help, you wouldn't see it. But you can see it. 314 down in the exhibit hall.
Okay, great. Let's see here, then we have, there's a question about, is it possible to have the PP emailed to us? Yeah, if you put in the chat your email address, I can send that out to people.
What is the
that's
PPE?
the PowerPoint. You can also email us if you want, and we're
Yes.
happy to send you the PowerPoints also.
Right, absolutely. You can email any of our presenters to have them send you the PowerPoints as well. Great. All right. Is there a link to the CF legal hotline on the CFF website? Yes.
No.
It's not? Oh, okay.
No.
I just missed- I
So
thought
you
there was.
would just, our website is suffianpassamano.com, but there's not a link on the CFF.
Ah, good to know.
But use the email address or the telephone number because that way you can talk to someone about your situation right away.
Okay, great. Other question is for Beth, typically in our clinic, we don't encourage families to apply for benefits for their children. In your experience, is this something that you see success with?
Yes. So I listened yesterday to the health equity session that was live streamed, and there was just a wonderful discussion about, how people who don't have access to food or housing and have great need financially, and no one talked about SSI benefits, so I did make a note to try to talk about that. So, SSI benefits for a person with CF who meets the eligibility criteria can be life-saving for people. We see people then have the ability to move out of a house that's, falling apart that has mice into a better home, to have more money for food in addition to having food stamps, to have money for gas so that they can go to the clinic. So SSI, unfortunately for children with CF, it's a really underutilized benefit. The parents have to meet certain low-income criteria that we talked about before, and the children have to either meet the criteria that's listed in the Social Security Act or be as severe as the criteria. So there might be a child who has autism, does a few breathing treatments a day, and has speech difficulty. That child may meet the as severe as criteria or may meet the autism criteria. There are a lot of children we're helping right now that just have severe digestive trouble. And we are successfly getting them benefits. So it's a great resource that I think is really underutilized by the pediatric centers. And I was going to try to do a paper on just a way, a checklist for centers to say, like, does this person have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Refer them to CF Legal to see if we could help with SSI, because it gives the people a cash benefit, a monthly cash benefit. And right now that amount is $840 a month, and that's going to go up in January. But New York and California supplement with state money, so people get a little over $1,000 a month. Now, if the parent is sort of right on the cusp of the household income cutoff, then the person may have a reduction of the amount, but we see it just dramatically improving the lives of the children with CF who are living in low-income households. So I do think that the idea that the goal should be to not have children on SSI it should be the opposite. We should make sure that our low-income children living in low-income households are able to access a federal benefit that is available to people who are low income and meet the disability criteria. It's sort of an untouched pot of gold that unfortunately I think a lot of people are not being made aware of.
Yeah, and I will add that in 2020, after the first 9 months of the pandemic, we did a survey of our SSI beneficiaries, people who are clients of ours who help get SSI. And we asked them a series of questions, and this is not published, but this is what was reported to us. Food security substantially increased in the household that had a child, or at least one child, receiving SSI. So they had access more regular to food in adequate amounts and in improved quality of food because of SSI. Also, the quality of housing improved substantially because they are on SSI. That meant safer, cleaner, better housing. Also, one thing, and this was a surprise, 78% of all of the respondents said, we now see our clinic more regularly because we have funds for transportation, either gasoline or bus fare or whatever transportation they need to get to the clinic. And we all know that for CF care, regular clinic visits translates to improved health outcomes. And that's been established by any number of public reviews. The other thing during the COVID-19, what we found is that people on SSI had stable income from the SSI benefit. So they had stability of resources to weather the COVID-19 lockdown and epidemic. So they had stability and security of income and all of the benefits that came. Increased access to health care, increased access to food, increased access to housing. All of that was sustained during a period of enormous economic upheaval because of SSI. So all of those things are good. I don't know anything about SSI that would adversely affect someone.
Next question is about, it says, let's see, you stress the importance of documented clinical status for case review by SSDI. I'm wondering how much negative detail, such as lack of compliance with clinic visits, with therapies, et cetera, impacts the decision for ongoing benefits. Should these details be documented?
That's a great question. So clearly, a CF care center needs to document all things that are going on with the patient. So if the person is not doing their prescribed therapies, then obviously the clinic needs to note that. If the reason is they are severely depressed and tell you they cannot actively do their treatments because they're suffering from severe depression, it would be helpful to note that. If the person has lost their insurance coverage and cannot access the medication, it would be important to note that. So I think obviously as CF care teams, you have to note what the person is doing and what the person isn't doing, but it is good to have an explanation of why they're not doing something. And then also, it's not a fatal note that means the person can never get benefits. I mean, often if we see a note like that, we discuss with the patient, you know, hey, you need to talk to your clinic about whatever strategies they need. And then we would want to see a new clinic note that talks about if the patient has improved, if in fact that's true. Same with drug abuse or smoking, vaping. So Social Security will not approve benefits for someone with a pulmonary condition if they are smoking, vaping, or using electronic cigarettes. They just say you're making your condition worse, which of course is true, and they won't do it. So when we see that in the records, we discuss with the person the effect that will have on the application. We won't take a case where someone is actively smoking, vaping, or using electronic cigarettes because we know it will be denied. And since we are getting funding from CF Foundation, we're not just taking their money. We want to take the money and funding for people who we think we can get approved. And so that person then, we suggest they talk to their clinic about ways to stop smoking and, you know, things that they can do. And then when they have, we usually would like to see 1, but possibly 2 clinic visits where it says person is no longer doing whatever they're doing. If they are abusing drugs, Social Security wants to see that the person has completed a drug treatment program. And so we will tell the patient that we need some certificate of completion of a drug treatment program.
Just one other word on clinic notes indicating non-compliance. Non-compliance is a conclusory statement. Doesn't explain the reasons. So it also allows Social Security to, if it's not explained, attach any explanation that they select, whether it's true or not. So if a patient is not taking the medication as prescribed, and the reason is they've lost insurance coverage to pay for that medication, therefore it's not available to them. Well, that is a significant difference between a willful failure to comply and an inability to comply. And those are the types of things that make all the difference in the world. And because if the reason is not stated, Social Security is entitled, or anyone else who reads, is entitled to attach their own interpretation of those statements.
One other, this kind of piggybacks on this, it says, can you talk about whether people with CF can get SSI or SSDI based on coexisting mental health or substance abuse problems?
So substance abuse is an absolute bar to benefits. So Social Security just says that is not a disability. Substance abuse is an absolute bar to getting benefits. Active substance abuse.
And just to point on that, that's the use of illegal drugs and the illegal use of lawful drugs.
Right. So mental health, there is criteria for depression, for anxiety. It's hard to get benefits based on mental health issues by themselves. I think certainly if people have hospital stays for either harm to themselves or that is a strong piece of evidence for getting benefits based on mental health issues. But it's hard to get benefits just based on, I have depression. I think there has to be some significant clinic notes and documentation of how that is limiting the person during the day and during the night and keeping them making them unable to engage in more than 20 hours of work a week. But I think often what we are looking at is that as severe as. So when I was speaking, I think at NACFC many years ago, I talked about sort of the combination plate, like if you go to Panda Express and you're getting 3 different things for the combination plate. So often for people with mental health issues, they have a combination of issues. So they may have mental health issues, they may have hard to control diabetes, and they may have a nice amount of treatment time. So we always want to talk about whatever CF limitations there are, and also talk about mental health. So.
And just keep in mind that the standards are not subjective, they are objective. Social Security for mental health care lists in their regulations the objective clinical symptoms that must be present to be considered disabled for depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions. And it lists that those objective findings have to be of a particular severity before they would be considered disabled by that mental health condition. And those standards are quite high. So number one, they're objective. Number two, that the degree of severity set by Social Security for mental health is quite high. Keep those things in mind.
Right, and we have a lot of clients right now. I mean, at any given time, we have 300 to 400 Social Security cases pending in the United States. And we have quite a lot of people right now who do have mental health issues. But we also do like to discuss any CF-related issues or other issues. And we don't care what the main driver is for the disability, as long as the person has CF. So right now we have, I don't know, probably about 15 people who have cancer, and that's the reason that they can't work. And we can help those people. So it doesn't have to be that CF.
But they have CF as well.
Right. It has to be a person who has CF, but the main reason that they can't work does not have to be CF treatment or their CF condition. So I think sometimes people say, oh, I don't think you can help me. I have, breast cancer, and that's the reason I can't work. So as long as the person has CF, and we think they're eligible, regardless of what medical condition is making them eligible, we can assist them.
Great. And there's a question about, is there a quantification for the mental health diagnosis?
Well, for mental health, if you've been hospitalized for self-harm, then for suicide attempt or self-harm, that is one of the listed criteria. But otherwise, you're going to have a lot of medical documentation of daily limitations caused by the mental health issue. So if you don't have a hospitalization for a mental health crisis, then you will have to have a lot of documentation. But certainly we can talk to the person with CF or their family member. In addition, I just wanted to make sure people know that we have been speaking a lot virtually for CF Education Days, and a lot of people want to know about Social Security, but we also are doing lunchtime programs for CF care centers. So you give us about 30, 40 minutes, you can have your lunch and we can talk to the team. Because I just think there's still, even after all these years, a lot of misconceptions about Social Security. Mm-hmm. And I know recently we did a CF Care Center lunchtime event a few weeks ago, and everyone seemed to have learned a lot. So that's also available. There's no charge for a lunchtime CF Center talk. So let us know if you're interested in that.
Yeah, we found a lot that we have a lot of old friends, social workers and clinic staff that have heard us present many times and are quite familiar with these principles. But a lot of staff is new. You know, new young social workers, new nursing staff, even new physician staff. They hear it for the first time, and it really aligns the ideas in their mind in a way that they can remember and convey to their patients when their patients need to know it.
Great. All right, we're over time, so let me try to get past, get through these last few questions here. There's a question about the ABLE program.
So the ABLE accounts allow a person who is on SSI, which means they can only have $2,000 of assets. The person can have it's called an ABLE account. You set it up through a bank, and you or someone else can put up to $15,000 a year in the account, and that amount is not counted towards your $2,000 SSI asset limit. The max you can have is $100,000, but any money you put in any year over $15,000 will make you ineligible for SSI. So if in 2022 your mom put in $15,000 into your ABLE account, and then next week your grandmother puts $1,000 into the ABLE account, the $1,000 where you're over $15,000 will be counted for purposes of SSI. But it's a good way if you have, you know, family members who want to have money that you could use. It's much easier than something called a special needs trust, which is more complicated and has restrictions on what you can use the money for. But money in the ABLE account can be taken out by the person with CF to use for the person with CF. And certainly, if someone has specific questions about the ABLE account, that was a very quick ABLE account discussion, but certainly people can contact us about that.
Yeah.
Great. A couple other questions. Would it be possible to develop a checklist for CF centers to utilize collecting information important to include in clinic notes?
I mean, I think the slide that we had is pretty much the top ones, but you know, I'm fine to send anyone who wants that slide. And it's really all about daily limitations and treatment time. So not just the person's doing albuterol, pulmozyme, and Toby. How long is it taking?
How many times a day?
15 minutes for albuterol, 10 minutes, it's really probably 10 minutes for albuterol, 15 minutes for pulmozyme. You know, it takes me about 30 minutes to do inhaled antibiotic. So the time it's taking, if people are taking naps, how long people are in the bathroom, do people have trouble with their memory? Are people having trouble completing tasks? All of those things, diabetes management. You know, we have someone right now with severe mental health trouble who sleeps about 15 hours a day. So he has very good records documenting that and why that is the case. So any kind of daily limitation, because when Social Security looks at daily limitations, they are trying to see if there are enough limitations to make the assertion the person can't work more than 20 hours a week credible. And so, you know, that's the most important thing.
And also, just a word on doing your daily inhaled treatments. It's not just the time you spend breathing the vapors in through the nebulizer, setting it up, cleaning it afterwards, and all of the aspects that are necessary to make to do the treatment.
Right.
Both setup, cleanup, and administration.
Right.
Great. Next question is, here, let me pull up this one. Does the SSA 1619B program allow for patients on SSI or SSDI to work more than 20 hours or make more gross income?
Good question. So, you know, we didn't have time to get into everything, but so for SSI, and it's only SSI, there is a section of the Social Security Code called Section 1619B. This is a fantastic program that no one seems to know about, and we have tried to spread the word, in the past 25 years of doing the CF hotline and speeches, but I do think this is a great program. It allows someone on SSI to work more than the allowable monthly amount. You stop getting your SSI check, but you keep your Medicaid benefits. And if you become unable to work, and this is the only time that this is true, you contact Social Security and tell them you are now too sick to work, and they turn the benefit amount back on. It is the only time you can have that happen, but it works really well for people who can work over the allowable, but want to have the ability, if they get sick, to have that benefit start back up. The other thing is if you live in one of the 12 states that did not expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, which big ones, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, and then 9 others. If you live in one of those states and you lose SSI, there's almost no way for you to get Medicaid. And online for, let's say for Florida, it says, we will give you Medicaid if you're disabled. But that's if you have SSI, not you just say you're disabled. So people in states where they cannot get Medicaid if they lose SSI, 1619B is a great way to work over the allowable, keep your Medicaid, and if you find that you're not able to work, Social Security will turn your check back on.
Great information. One last question. So if a patient contacts you about applying for SSI and you notice that a lot of the important pieces of documentation are not there from the past 12 months, is it still sufficient to get things documented in one note just prior to the application, or try to pull maybe some other notes for maybe that other aspects of that patient's record, maybe like from the primary care doctor or things like that?
So we would then talk to the person on the phone, and we would talk to them about what's missing from their record. Because we do an intake when we talk to the person, and the person tells us all about their problems. If we get their records and we don't see a lot of that, then we tell the person, a lot of this is not in your records, and we talk to them about what needs to be in their record, and clearly the person says this is an issue. We're not telling people to make anything up, obviously. And then the person would need to have at least one clinic visit with the CF center. Sometimes we might need 2 before we could then start the case, as long as we get good records. Primary care physicians don't usually have the attention to detail and understanding of Social Security. So, pulling some just minor records from a bunch of different doctors, like, we really like the CF centers, obviously.
Well, because the Social Security is looking at it, like you're asserting that you're disabled by CF. Your CF.
Well, what if it's something else?
In the typical situation, it's you're asserting you're disabled by CF. If the CF clinic records don't reflect those symptoms, Social Security will wonder why the CF symptom is being reported or recorded in the non-CF treating physician's record.
Right.
It just doesn't match up. And of course, the goal here is for the medical record to be complete and accurate. Reflect what is actually happening in the life of the patient. So it's not about, oh, you need to have this to make sure that's in there. No, the goal is so that the medical record reflects the experience and symptoms and limitations in the life of the person.
So I do, but before we go, I know so many people have asked this question. So if health improves, what should the person do if they get reviewed? So people can have improvement of health from a variety of things. Obviously, some people have had health improvement from modulators. Some people have health improvement from lung transplant. Some people get dramatic health improvement with diabetes if they get a pump, an insulin pump. Right. So, so the fact that you've had health improvement doesn't mean you're not eligible for benefits, because it depends on how you get that maintaining of health. So a lot of people tell us, yes, I feel much better, but I'm still exercising, making my meals. I do get tired by 4 o'clock, and I do some breathing treatments, or I now have mental health and digestive issues. So the fact that someone maybe has had an increase of FEV1 does not necessarily mean that they will be immediately kicked off benefits, as long as their other issues are developed in the medical records. If someone is thinking of going off of benefits, it's a great idea to have them contact the CF hotline, because there are ways. 1619B is the way to keep Medicaid, but be able to work a lot more. For Social Security disability, if you plan and you tell Social Security that you are going to be going back to work, most of the time you can keep Medicare under something called Medicare continuation of benefits. To immediately jump off benefits the minute you get a job offer, if you're high income or your family has a lot of income, I guess it might not matter. But for most people with CF, they're not in high income families, and at least the people calling us, I guess. And so it's really important to do some planning so that if you can keep Medicare, or you can keep Medicaid, or you can understand how you can access insurance, or you can understand how you can get 1619B to have that cushion if you do get sick. It is something that people should be planning, and we do see a lot of people who jump off benefits, get a job, and maybe 6 months later find out it wasn't exactly what they thought it would be like. And then we can help them with the new application. But again, in many cities and states, that could be a 12-month wait till they get back on benefits. So planning is important, and information is important. And I guess since we're ending, I do want to say that our ability to appear by Zoom is a great example of how wonderful remote access to both meetings and work is for people with CF. So I encourage all of you to make sure that when you do have events, that there is remote access for both parents who have children with CF or people with CF, because it really is a wonderful way both for people to work. We have a lot of people now working remotely, and they say it's fantastic. You know, they can take a break and do a treatment, or they're not in, in an office filled with people who have the flu. So we appreciate that NACFC and CF Foundation have allowed us to speak remotely and allowed people to access this event via live stream. And it's a great example of how helpful this can be for people with CF. So we appreciate the CF care teams. We appreciate the CF Foundation. We appreciate all of our wonderful clients who just send us really heartfelt thank yous and appreciate our work. This has been our life's work, and we hope that we can continue to help as many people as possible. And we thank you for helping us help so many people with CF.
Yes, because and to all of the care team members out there, we love helping our clients, but we couldn't do it without you. So the role that you play is essential, important, meaningful, and it improves the lives of so many families. So we thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. James and Beth and our other speakers, Sarah and Pablo. This was a wonderful session.